What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me. And of course, I'm continuing my series on my NHL 2021-2022 season predictions. And with that, we've made it to our final division that we'll be covering, the only division that's left to cover, the Metropolitan division. And for this video, the first team up will be the Carolina Hurricanes. But like I've done for every other division, before I get into the Hurricanes, I'm going to tee up the Metro. So looking at this division, in my opinion, there's no question that it is the best division in this league. And in turn, it is probably the most difficult to predict. When looking at the other divisions in the league, I would feel like there's probably at least one team that many people would pick as the consensus best team in that division. Whereas for the Metro, I actually don't know, who is the best team in the Metro? It's up for debate. Who you think the best team is. Is it the Hurricanes, the Penguins, the Islanders? These are all really good teams. And I can't say for sure that anyone would definitively say that there's one team in particular that just takes the cake above everyone else. In terms of competition as well, I don't see a lot of really bad teams. I can see legitimately 6, maybe even 7 teams where you can make the case as to why they should be in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So in summary, this is a very deep division. All right, so now with that out of the way, let's get into the Carolina Hurricanes. So entering last season, the Hurricanes were coming off a relatively solid regular season. They had a good year, and then they got into the bubble. They beat off the New York Rangers in a sweep in that qualifying round before eventually falling to the Boston Bruins in technically the first round of that playoffs. To me, I always feel like the Hurricanes have a ton of potential to do something really special, but they just always seem like they're on the cusp, but not quite there into the territory of elite teams or Stanley Cup contenders, I guess. Last season, they had an amazing year, a 36-12-8 record for a total of 80 points, which was first in the Central Division with a 117-point pace. However, come playoff time, they did fall in the second round to the eventual Stanley Cup champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning. Taking a look at their offensive numbers, they averaged a 3.13 goals for per game, which was very solid at 11th in the NHL, and a 25.6 power play percentage, which was absolutely lethal, second in the league. And defensively, they were also very good at 2.39 goals against per game, top 5 in the NHL, and an 85.2% penalty kill percentage, which was third in the league. So obviously this was a very good team that had an amazing regular season, basically top 10 in offense. Special teams was probably the best in the league. If you're combining both power play and penalty kill, it averages out to probably the best special teams. And defensively, still an elite team, obviously. Taking a look at their top 5 scorers from last season. First, we have Sebastian Aho, who in the full 56 games, 24 goals, 33 assists for 57 points. Now for Aho, it's the same old every year. One of the best young two-way centers in the league, about a point per game player. Second, we have Vincent Trocheck, who had a very good season, 47 games, 17 goals, 26 assists for 43 points. Now, Trocheck always had that potential. Even when he was with Florida, he did have a couple years, not too long ago, where he had over 70 points. Then, the last couple years there, he kind of fell off a little bit in terms of his statistics. And ever since coming to Carolina, this past season, he was a massive fit. He played really well. And hopefully that continues moving forward for him. Then we have a two-way tie for third. First, we have Andrei Svechnikov, who in 55 games scored 15 goals and 27 assists for 42 points. Now, Andrei Svechnikov, even though he had a relatively solid year, I always get the feeling that he should provide a little bit more, especially in terms of his goal scoring. I just feel like he has a much higher ceiling in terms of his goal scoring. And for him to have only 15 goals, although that's still relatively good, I just feel like there's just more for him to give, I think, in my opinion. We also have Dougie Hamilton, who in 55 games had 10 goals and 32 assists for 42 points. Now for Dougie, one of the better offensive defensemen in this league, so him scoring at about this pace makes total sense to me. Ever since he's come to Carolina, the best years of his career, really. And in fifth, we got Martin Necas, who had a very solid year, 53 games, 14 goals, 27 assists for 41 points. Necas continues to get better year in and year out, and I feel like him still being young, along with this young Hurricanes core, he's just going to get better and better, and the team is going to continue to flourish as a result, and I feel like he's going to be a key piece to the Hurricanes moving forward. And in goal, there was kind of 3 goalies that the Hurricanes went with. Obviously, Peter Mrazek kind of had some injury trouble, so he didn't play a ton, but as for their legit tandem, first we got Alex Nedeljkovic, the rookie, who in 23 games, 15-5-3 record, a 1.9 goals against average, and a .932 save percentage. Just a fantastic year for Nedeljkovic, and it just really felt like their Hurricanes had finally found that true number 1 goaltender, that stud that they can use and be the franchise for that team moving forward for the next decade. Or so it appeared. Then we also have James Reimer, who in 22 games had a 15-5-2 record with a 2.66 goals against average and a .906 save percentage. Now for Reimer, he had a pretty good win record. Obviously, the Hurricanes being a good team would contribute to that. But you look at his stats, pretty average, I guess. Like, it's not going to wow you, but I feel like he's a relatively decent goaltender, especially in a backup role. Even though they lost in the second round, I still feel like this is a great young core, and they're going to be a very solid team for years to come. However, some of the offseason moves they made, yeah, we'll get into that, but it's just weird around this team right now. Now, entering this season, I still feel like there's quite high expectations for this team to make the playoffs and go on a deep playoff run. But like I said, yeah, let's get into the offseason moves they did here. I guess we'll start with what they lost because they made some very questionable decisions, I would say. So I'll go over some of the smaller losses. First, they lost Brock McGinn, who was more of a depth forward for this team, decided to sign with Pittsburgh. Not really a huge loss there. And they also lost Warren Foegele, who I guess wasn't really going to be a part of their long-term future, or they just saw it as an opportunity to trade for a better asset. So they shipped him off to Edmonton, just a depth piece, third-line guy. Not a huge loss as well. Now, they did shed some goaltending. They lost James Reimer, who ended up going to the Sharks, and Peter Mrazek, who ended up signing with the Leafs. They did make some replacements, but obviously those two were pretty solid goaltenders for them all around. But the biggest head scratchers here. First, losing Dougie Hamilton, who ended up walking to the New Jersey Devils. Apparently, the Hurricanes were lowballing him with contract negotiations. They weren't offering him more than like $6 million a year, which obviously Dougie Hamilton's worth way more than that in terms of what he brings to that blue line, especially offensively. And even worse, they traded away their future cornerstone franchise #1 goaltender in Alex Nedeljkovic, flipped into the Detroit Red Wings, lowballing him as well. I think they wouldn't even offer him $3 million. Like, that's insane. Like, based on the amazing rookie year he had, he was going to be the future of that franchise, and they just tossed him aside. It's just a terrible, terrible decision by the Hurricanes, in my opinion. So in terms of what they added, I mean, yeah, they got some decent replacements, but obviously it's not really quite the same that they used to have. Yeah, they did acquire Ian Cole. They signed him, very solid depth defenseman. They traded for Ethan Bear. Still very young defenseman, could get better, so that's maybe more of an underrated move. One of the more positive moves, I guess I would say. And then they signed Anthony DeAngelo, who obviously was a locker room cancer with the Rangers. But, as a hockey player, he's still pretty solid offensive defenseman. If he can bring his talents and provide the offense that he did with the Rangers, that could be low-key a very solid replacement to replace Dougie Hamilton, especially offensively. Not so much on the defensive end, but we'll see, I guess. Now, because they got rid of basically their entire goaltending, they had to replace it with the brand new tandem. So they acquired Frederik Andersen, who they signed from Toronto, and they signed Antti Ranta from the Coyotes. So those two guys are going to be their new goaltending tandem. Now, these are two guys who are in their 30s now, more so injury prone. I don't know how this is a better goaltending tandem than they had last season, but I definitely think both of them do have some bounce back potential. So I guess we'll see what happens for them. Hopefully they play pretty well, especially in a very well-structured Hurricanes system. And then, of course, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who they decided to offer sheet for 1 year at $6.1 million. As of recording this video, I do know that the Montreal Canadiens decided not to match that offer sheet. Therefore, Kotkaniemi will be a member of the Carolina Hurricanes for, at the very least, this upcoming season. Now, this is a very weird one for me because, honestly, he's not worth 6.1 at the very least at this point of his career. And especially when you could have given that money to Hamilton or Nedeljkovic, like, that's just a total brain fart, in my opinion. Obviously, they do see some potential in him, though, and whether you want to say it was out of revenge for, Montreal offering Aho or not, I mean, ultimately, they wouldn't have given him that contract if they didn't think that he would be a pivotal part of the Hurricanes organization moving forward. Now, that is a steep price, but I feel like he does have potential to maybe become the player that he should have been in Montreal. Now, maybe he develops better. Like, they don't really need centers right now because they have Aho and Trocheck and Stahl as your top three centers. So they're likely going to be starting him on the wing. We'll see how he develops there, and maybe he can, start to move on the right track in terms of his development. Like I said before, sort of weird offseason moves that they made, but I still feel like this team is probably a playoff lock. Taking a look at who I have as my top 5 scorers for the Hurricanes this season. First, I'm going to go with Sebastian Aho with 37 goals and 48 assists for 85 points. Obviously, we know with Aho, like I said, very elite centerman, one of the best young ones in the game. And obviously 30 goals to me is a given, and he should hover around over 80 points. I feel like this is probably a formality, let's be honest. And second, I'm going to go with Andrei Svechnikov, scoring 30 goals and 40 assists for 70 points. Now, for Svechnikov, we all know that he's a very solid winger in his league, and he's still a very young player, but I still think he can take his game to another level. I mean, they said when this guy was drafted, at his peak, he could be a 40-goal scorer potentially. So we know he has it in him to be a very gifted goal scorer. It's time for him to prove it though, because he hasn't really hit the 30 goal mark yet. I just feel like he has more goal scoring upside in him. So I want to see him score at least 30 goals, but he's a pretty good playmaker. So about 70 points is very fair. But hopefully he takes his game to another level because I really like Svechnikov. And third, I'm going to go with Teuvo Teravainen to score 21 goals and 46 assists for 67 points. Now Teravainen, he's a great playmaking winger. He has chemistry with Aho and Svech on that top line. Just makes sense that he puts up about 60, 65 points. And in fourth, I'm going to go with Vincent Trocheck to score 25 goals and 36 assists for 61 points. Now, Trocheck is obviously a fit in Carolina, as we saw last season, although I don't think he's going to score at that same rate. If he can, continue to fill that role as a very solid, very amazing second line center with about 60 points, I feel like that's a win for this Hurricanes team, honestly. And in fifth, I'm going to go with Martin Necas, who I have scoring 20 goals and 35 assists for 55 points. Now, Necas is a guy who's continuing to get better, and I feel like he's just going to continue to elevate his game offensively, continue to step up. And I feel like 50, 55 points, pretty solid production. I feel like that's fair, honestly. All right, so now getting into what my expectations are for the Carolina Hurricanes this season. And I'll say it again, although I do feel like they made some questionable moves during this offseason, I still feel like throughout the lineup, from their forward group to their solid defense, even to their goaltending, I feel like there's bounce back potential. I feel like this is a very well-structured, very solid team, and I would be shocked if they didn't make the playoffs. In fact, I feel like they're going to have a really good regular season regardless, and I'm picking them to win the division. So yes, I have them finishing first in the Metropolitan Division with a 48-24-10 record for a total of 106 points, and they will make the playoffs. Yeah, just looking at this roster throughout their lineup, I feel like it's probably the most complete and well-rounded team in the entire Metropolitan Division. That's what's leading to my decision for them winning the division. Like, you look at their forward group, I feel like there is a ton of depth on that team. From line 1 to line 4, I feel like all those lines, you can roll them pretty evenly and they can all score and contribute some pretty solid offense. Defensively, even though they lost Hamilton, I still feel like they're very solid. They have Jacob Slavin. They have Brett Pesce. Ian Cole, I think, is pretty solid. D'Angelo, Ethan Bear. I feel like it's not a bad defense overall, offensively and defensively. Obviously, in goal, it's probably going to be the question mark again for this team. Like, how is Frederik Andersen going to pan out coming off a rough season where he was kind of injured for most of the year? Antti Ranta coming off a not-so-great season with the Coyotes. I still feel like both those guys are very good goaltenders, and especially in a well-structured defensive system like the Hurricanes, I feel like the jobs will be made much easier. And this would pertain mostly to Frederik Andersen when I say that, because throughout the majority of his career with the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Leafs did not have all that great, defensive groups. So I feel like with him, he was still standing on his head night in and night out, and he still played solidly when they needed him to. And I feel like now going in a Hurricane system that's very tight defensively, although last year the Leafs were very good defensively, but I feel like he was just injury prone. If he's back and fully healthy, I expect a bounce back season, and he should be a very solid starting goaltender once again. Overall, this is a very solid team. They're as complete as they come. So I feel like they're going to have a great regular season, make the playoffs. Now the only question is, can they take that next step and become a legitimate Stanley Cup contender? We'll have to see what happens. But I feel like, they're moving in the right direction, and they have a very solid core moving forward here. And they're just going to be a pain for a lot of teams for years to come, in my opinion. So that's going to wrap up my season expectations on the Carolina Hurricanes this season. So do you agree with me? And you think that this team is still going to be an elite regular season team, make the playoffs quite comfortably, and maybe go on a deep playoff run? Or do you think the offseason they had might make a massively negative impact on this team? And as a result, in a very tough Metropolitan Division, maybe they fall out of the playoffs. Maybe they take a massive step back. Let me know your guys' thoughts as always. Please hit a like if you like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. Alright, so I'm going to leave now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video. See you guys later.